My name is Clara Hastings. I am a 32-year-old wife and mother of two, and I destroyed the one thing I swore to protect with my life, my marriage. I had it all, a loving husband, beautiful children, and a peaceful home, until I gave in to reckless impulses with a younger man. It was supposed to be nothing, just excitement, a secret. But secrets have a way of screaming out when you least expect it. I was caught, humiliated, and thrown out. Now, 17 months later, I am still trying to pick up the pieces. But the real question is, will he ever give me closure again? I am married to Ethan, the most devoted husband a woman could ask for. We had been together for 13 years, raising two beautiful boys and building a stable life in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Ethan was steady, strong, loyal, everything I thought I needed. And then, I broke it all for a man I barely knew. His name was Tyler, 27, handsome, charming, married, a neighbor with a young wife and 3 kids. The moment we met at a community picnic, something stirred inside me. Something reckless, something I thought I had buried long ago. It reminded me of the first time I had tasted wild passion when I was 18. That raw, irrational attraction. I should have turned and run. But I didn't. I let it grow. Tyler and his wife, Marcy, had just moved into the neighborhood. They were new, vibrant, friendly. Ethan and I were among the youngest couples in a mostly older community, so we naturally welcomed them in. 1 week later, we ran into Tyler at a car dealership while shopping for a new SUV. Ethan struck up a friendly conversation with him. Tyler worked there in finance and helped us get a great deal. While the paperwork processed, Tyler and I exchanged looks. Subtle, but electric. And wrong. I knew it even then. The next week, I returned to the dealership to get mud flaps installed. That's when it began. Tyler invited me into his office, under the guise of discussing financing. But it didn't take long before he confessed he felt something for me. I should have walked out. Instead, I stayed. I admitted I felt it too. The danger. The forbidden thrill. I told him it was wrong. He agreed. And still, neither of us stopped. The first time we were together was a weekday morning, after our spouses left for work and the kids were off to school. I felt like I was watching someone else from outside my body. It wasn't even about pleasure, it was about the danger, the adrenaline, the escape. It was like being on a roller coaster with no brakes, and I had no desire to slow down. Ethan never saw it coming. He gave me no reason to stray. He was everything, devoted, affectionate, faithful. He fulfilled me emotionally, physically, and intellectually. I wasn't bored. I wasn't lonely. I wasn't unloved. I was simply greedy. Foolish. I thought I could have both, a good man at home, and a dirty little secret tucked away in someone else's house. Tyler and I only met 4 times in 5 months. But the weight of those encounters, it was enough to break a life apart. I told myself it didn't count, that it was just physical, that I loved Ethan and would never leave him. I told myself lies to soothe the fire of guilt licking at my conscience. Then came the day everything exploded. It was a Thursday morning. I was at Tyler's house. We were in his bedroom, completely exposed, completely lost in our delusion. That's when Marcy's mother barged in. I didn't even hear her enter the house until she was already screaming. She went ballistic, slapped Tyler across the face, scratched him so hard she left a bleeding gash down his neck. Then she turned to me, hit me square in the jaw, and yanked out 2 handfuls of my hair before I could grab my clothes. I stumbled out of that house barefoot, bruised, and half naked. When I got home, I couldn't stop shaking. I locked the door, curled up on the couch, and stared at the ceiling. The weight of what I had done came crashing down. My perfect marriage, my family, the life Ethan and I built. It was all about to burn to the ground. And I had lit the match. I left Ethan a message. Told him I needed to talk, that it was urgent. When he didn't reply, I sent a text. Still silence. Then, about an hour later, I heard furious knocking on the front door and saw Marcy and her mother screaming through the windows, demanding I come outside. I froze, paralyzed by fear and shame. Thankfully, the boys were at school. Later that day, I saw Ethan's car pull into the driveway. I ran to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, tried to make myself look human again. I walked into the living room, heart pounding, preparing to face the man whose heart I had just torn to pieces. But Ethan didn't come inside. I saw him through the front window, walking straight past our house, toward Tyler and Marcy's. I watched him spend 3 full hours there. When he finally returned, I rushed to him, arms open, words tumbling out in apologies. He didn't let me touch him. His face was hard, unreadable. He said 3 words that cracked my soul. "You need to leave." I fell to my knees, begging, pleading. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He simply turned and picked up the phone. He called my mother, told her what I'd done, told her to come get me. She arrived quietly, helped me pack a bag, and ushered me out of my own home. That night, I called Ethan again. He picked up, but said nothing. I poured my heart out, told him I'd do anything to fix this, that I would spend the rest of my life making it up to him. He asked if I was finished. Then he said, "I want a divorce." And just like that, the life I destroyed finally crumbled to ash. I spent that night at my parents' house in a daze, clutching a pillow like it could anchor me to some version of reality that wasn't crumbling around me. My mother barely spoke. She didn't need to. The disappointment in her eyes spoke volumes. I had humiliated myself, my husband, my children, and now my own parents had to clean up the wreckage of my shame. The next day, I tried calling Ethan again. He answered, but not with warmth. Just a quiet, heavy hello. I told him I was sorry, that I knew I had no right to ask for anything, that I loved him, that I was broken without him. He didn't respond to any of it. Just silence. Finally, he said, "I want you to stay at your parents' house for a while. A couple weeks. I'll handle things with the boys." I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood. I wanted to ask him 1,000 things. Were the boys okay? What had he told them? Did he even plan on letting me come home? But I said nothing except, "When can I see you?" "Not now," he replied, with a finality that shattered what was left of my heart. "But you can call. Once a day? 9 o'clock. I nodded even though he couldn't see me, and whispered, "I love you." He hung up. That first week was torture. I counted every minute until 9. I'd call, and Ethan would answer, but he'd never say more than a few words. I'd pour out apologies, try to explain the inexplicable, beg him to believe it wasn't love, it wasn't real, it was a foolish, selfish impulse. And every night, the call would end the same way, my voice breaking as I said, "I love you," and the hollow click of silence in return. Then, on the 5th night, he dropped the bomb. "I want a divorce." I felt the world tilt under me. No, no, please, Ethan. Don't say that. Please, not yet. Just give me a chance. Let me prove it to you. Let me fix this. "I don't want anything from you," he said. "I'd give you everything I own just to be rid of you." My body went cold. "You don't mean that. You're angry. I deserve your anger. But please, don't make this final." "You already did," he said, and hung up. I curled up on the couch, shaking and sobbing. I hadn't just broken his trust. I'd shattered the man who used to look at me like I was the center of his world. Now he looked through me like I didn't exist. The next morning, I stopped crying. Not because I wasn't broken anymore, but because something inside me hardened. I couldn't let it end this way. I couldn't give up without fighting for the man who had loved me without limits. So I came up with a plan. If he wanted everything, I'd give him everything. I met with a lawyer, not to fight the divorce, but to draft a post-nuptial agreement so lopsided, no sane man could refuse it. It gave Ethan full control over our marital assets if he chose to stay for 30 months. If I ever cheated again, I'd forfeit everything. No alimony, no property, not even child support. I offered him freedom, power, and control. And when I had the documents in hand, I had him served, before his divorce papers could reach me. That night, he called me. I'll never forget the way he sounded. Not angry, not cold, just confused, maybe even a little curious. "You're serious about this?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "I love you. I'll do anything to show you that. Anything." He was quiet for a long time. Then, in a voice that barely sounded like the man I married, he said, "Fine, I'll stay. But I want one condition added." "What is it?" "There's no requirement for us to sleep together, or even share a bed. I don't want that from you." My breath caught. That clause, it cut deeper than any insult. Still, I agreed. I thought time would heal things. That if I could be near him, help raise our boys, show him daily that I was loyal, I could mend what I'd broken. I believed we'd find our way back. But what we had now, it was barely a marriage. We were housemates, co-parents, strangers passing in the hallway. 17 months into this second chance, and Ethan still wouldn't let me touch him. No hugs, no kisses, no affection, and I couldn't blame him. It's strange how silence can be louder than words. In the beginning, I thought the absence of yelling meant things were improving. That maybe Ethan was slowly letting the bitterness fade. But as the days dragged on, the silence became something darker, like a fog I couldn't see through, pressing down on me in every room of our home. We lived under the same roof, but we didn't live together. Ethan treated me like I was invisible. No more shared meals. No more eye contact unless necessary. I slept in the same bed some nights, but he stayed on his side like I was a stranger who'd wandered into his home. The post-nup had saved our marriage on paper, but emotionally, we were ruins, burned out and hollow. He wouldn't even let me brush against him by accident. If I passed too close in the hallway, he'd shift away. I remember one morning reaching for a coffee mug, and our fingers grazed. He recoiled like I'd burned him. I stopped trying after that. The boys were the only thing that kept the rhythm of life moving forward. I poured myself into being the best mother I could be. I made their favorite meals, helped with homework, drove them to soccer practice. When Ethan was with them, he lit up. He laughed. He listened. He was still their dad. But when he turned to me, that light went out. Sometimes I caught him watching me when he thought I didn't notice. And for a second, I'd see the man I used to know, the man who once whispered that I was his entire world. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by that cold, controlled expression he'd mastered. I suggested counseling once. He didn't even answer. At night, I'd sit on the porch alone. Our neighbors, once friendly and chatty, barely nodded in my direction anymore. After the affair went public, the neighborhood wives made it clear I wasn't welcome. Some outright avoided me at school events. Others just smiled tightly and walked the other way. I'd torn apart not just my own marriage, but another family's, and that stain followed me like a shadow. Steve and Marcia divorced 8 months after everything exploded. She stayed in the neighborhood with their kids. I couldn't even walk my boys past their house without remembering the screaming, the betrayal, the look on Ethan's face when he found out. It wasn't just shame anymore, it was suffocating. I tried everything I could think of to rekindle something, anything. I cooked his favorite meals, left little notes on his desk, even tried to wear the perfume he once said reminded him of our honeymoon. Nothing worked. He barely noticed. Or worse, noticed and simply didn't care. I still remember the day I suggested moving. I thought maybe a new environment could help us start fresh. I'd been tending to the garden, one of the few things that brought me peace, and Ethan came outside with a cup of coffee. For a moment, it felt like we were normal again. We could leave this place, I said softly, start somewhere new. He didn't even hesitate. I'm not going anywhere unless work makes me. This is home for the boys. The message was clear. It wasn't home for us anymore. That night, I cried in the bathroom, biting down on a towel so the boys wouldn't hear. As the months passed, things only grew colder. Ethan implemented monthly STD testing. Not that he said it aloud. He just handed me the at-home test kits, left on the bathroom counter like medication. No words. No confrontation. Just quiet punishment. Even our vacations, once our escape from routine, became clinical. Adjoining hotel rooms, separate beds, no physical contact. The boys stayed in one room, we stayed in the other. He treated every trip like a mission, strict, efficient, emotionless. I clung to those rare moments when we sat beside each other on the beach, hoping his hand might brush mine, that some spark might still be alive. But nothing ever happened. Ethan didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He didn't belittle me. He just froze me out completely. And in many ways, that hurt worse than anything else. Because I still loved him, with every fiber of my being. And every day, I woke up in a house that felt less like a home and more like a museum of everything I destroyed. Sometimes I wondered if he was trying to forgive me, if he was hoping I'd give up first so he didn't have to be the one to end it. But I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. It was around month 10 of our post-nup arrangement when I finally admitted it to myself. What we had wasn't a marriage anymore. It was an agreement. A cold, contractual cohabitation based on silence, boundaries, and emotional exile. We were two ghosts haunting the same home, brushing past one another like strangers who used to mean everything. The boys had adjusted better than I expected. Maybe kids are more resilient than we give them credit for. Or maybe Ethan did such a good job of shielding them from the truth that they barely noticed the emotional chasm between us. But I saw it every day, in the way they hesitated before asking if Mom and Dad could both come to events, in the way they watched my face when Ethan ignored me. I lived for the little moments when I felt close to my sons. After school, they'd sit at the kitchen counter while I made dinner. They'd help set the table, tell me about their day, laugh at jokes I barely understood. Those moments kept me sane. They were my lifeline. But the evenings always ended the same. Ethan would come home, nod at them, barely glance in my direction, and eat in silence or alone. If I tried to sit next to him, he'd shift away like my presence was unbearable. I remember one night, I made his favorite lemon-roasted chicken with garlic mashed potatoes, the kind I used to make every birthday. I placed the plate in front of him. He stared at it for a moment, then said, "Don't cook for me." Nothing else. Just that. I took the plate and dumped it in the trash. The loneliness got worse after I lost the last of my friends in the neighborhood. Word had spread faster than wildfire when everything happened. And though some of the women had initially offered sympathetic smiles, they eventually drifted away, especially when Marcia stayed and became something of a tragic hero. Everyone sided with her, understandably. I was the villain of the street, and no one wanted to be seen with the villain. I stopped going to neighborhood gatherings, stopped walking the kids to the park. Even grocery trips became a strategic mission. I knew which hours were the quietest, when I could slip in and out without awkward run-ins or stares. The once lively neighborhood became a prison of my own making. Ethan, on the other hand, thrived. He doubled down on his friendships with the neighborhood dads, cigars, bourbon, and football talk. They'd gather on porches or in backyards, laughing, sharing stories, while I watched from behind the curtains, invisible. Occasionally, I'd hear them mention my name, then hush themselves quickly, glancing toward the house. The shame was never-ending. Even Steve's kids still played with mine. That was the most bitter irony of all. My boys still rode bikes with the children of the man I betrayed their father with. Ethan never stopped them. He said they shouldn't suffer for adult mistakes. But I couldn't even look at those kids without the bile rising in my throat. I tried, once, to reconnect physically with Ethan. It was late. We'd just come home from a family trip. One of those forced vacations where we acted normal in front of the kids. We were in our separate beds, in the same hotel room. I reached out and touched his hand gently. He jerked away like I'd shocked him. "Don't," he said. One word. I didn't try again. After that, something inside me began to change. I stopped chasing. Stopped leaving notes. Stopped waiting by the window when he came home late. I realized I had been trying to rebuild a bridge that Ethan had already burned, and he wasn't interested in laying down a single brick. Still, I stayed. I watered the garden. I ironed his shirts. I packed school lunches. Because part of me still believed that maybe, just maybe, love could be rebuilt from the ashes. That time could soften the pain. That the man who once looked at me like I was his entire world could find a way to see me again. But the days turned to months, and all that grew between us was distance. I began to wonder if staying was an act of hope, or just self-inflicted punishment. It was around the 1-year mark of our so-called second marriage when I began to feel like I was slowly unraveling. Living under the same roof with Ethan had become a daily exercise in restraint. I didn't cry anymore, not in front of him, not even when I was alone. I'd become numb, detached, a shadow of the woman I once was. But even numbness has its limits. One Friday evening, Ethan grilled steaks outside, as he always did. The boys helped him, laughing and flipping burgers while classic rock played through the outdoor speakers. I stayed inside, finishing the salad, careful not to intrude. I had learned long ago that my presence changed the energy. The laughter always faded when I stepped outside, replaced by tight smiles and quiet glances. I watched them through the kitchen window, the three of them together, easy, effortless, and I felt like a stranger peering into someone else's life. A life that used to be mine. That night, while they watched a movie in the living room, I stayed upstairs, scrolling through old photos on my phone. Family vacations, holidays, birthdays. Ethan had his arm around me in almost every picture. His eyes sparkled. He used to look at me like I was his world. Now, he couldn't even look at me without flinching. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was the life I was meant to live now. A life of silence, of penance. Had I truly destroyed everything beyond repair? Was there any way back? The next morning, I brought it up. He was in the kitchen, sipping coffee, reading the paper. I approached slowly, cautiously, like I was walking into enemy territory. "Ethan," I began, "can we talk?" He didn't look up. "We're talking." I took a breath. I can't keep living like this. I know I broke us. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. but I need to know if there's even a chance for us. For real healing. Or if we're just pretending for the boys. He finally looked at me. Cold. Measured. There's nothing to pretend, he said. We're raising our kids. That's all. I felt like the air had been knocked out of my chest. So that's it. No future. No hope. Ethan set his mug down, stood up, and said something I'll never forget. You gave up our future the day you crawled into another man's bed. I'm just here to make sure our boys still have one. Then he walked away. I spent the rest of the day in a fog. I watered the plants, folded laundry, made lunch for the boys, but I wasn't really there. My body moved, but my mind spiraled. Something in me cracked that afternoon, something I'd been holding together with duct tape and denial. That night, I packed a bag. I didn't plan to leave forever. I just needed space. Breathing room. A place where the walls didn't whisper my mistakes back at me every second. When I told Ethan I was leaving for a while, he barely reacted. Do what you want, he said flatly, not even looking up from the TV. I wanted him to stop me, to ask me to stay, but he didn't. So I walked out the door, got into my car, and drove to a furnished apartment I had quietly rented a few miles away. The silence in that place was different, clean, untouched by bitterness. It felt like pressing pause on a nightmare. I cried for the first time in weeks, deep, heaving sobs that left me breathless. But when the tears stopped, there was calm. I told Ethan I'd still be around for the boys, picking them up after school, hosting them for dinner a few nights a week. He agreed without protest. Maybe part of him was relieved too. The boys adjusted quickly. They liked the apartment. We decorated together, cooked meals, played games. It wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. They asked about Ethan, of course, but I told them we were trying to figure things out. That we both loved them more than anything. And that part was still true. But not seeing Ethan every day? That was harder than I expected. I caught myself calling him over silly things, asking about the lawn mower, the trash schedule, a recipe he used to make. I just wanted to hear his voice. Some nights, we talked longer. About the boys. About work. About the past. I could hear the softness returning in his voice, faint, but there, like a familiar melody playing far away. I didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time in months, I wasn't just surviving. I was waiting, for clarity, for truth, for something real, even if it meant finding it alone. Living alone was never something I imagined for myself. Yet there I was, in a quiet apartment that echoed with silence and guilt. The nights were the worst, long stretches of loneliness where my thoughts were louder than any noise. I'd lie awake replaying every moment, every mistake, every chance I had to say no and didn't. Still, there were flickers of light. The boys adapted quickly to the routine. They'd stay with me a few nights each week, and we built new rituals together. Taco Tuesdays, movie nights, gardening on the balcony, even if all we had were a few potted herbs. Their laughter filled the apartment in a way that reminded me what I was fighting for. One evening, after putting them to bed, I called Ethan. I didn't have a reason, at least not a practical one. I just wanted to hear his voice. He answered after a few rings. Hello. Hey, I said softly. I just wanted to thank you for being flexible with the boys. A pause. Then, they're doing fine. You're doing okay with them? I smiled faintly. Yeah, we're managing. They're happy. And that's what matters. Another pause. Then he surprised me. I saw the garden boxes out back. Tomatoes look good. I blinked. You came by the apartment? Just drove past, he said quickly, almost defensively. Wanted to make sure you were safe. My heart tightened at that. It was small, maybe meaningless, but it meant something to me. That weekend, when I picked the boys up, Ethan actually came to the door. For months, he'd just waved from inside or sent them out alone. But this time, he stood there, hand resting on the doorframe, looking at me like he didn't know what to feel. Thanks, I said. For everything. I know I don't deserve. I didn't say that, he interrupted. His eyes locked with mine for a brief moment before shifting away. Just don't mess this up again. And just like that, he closed the door. It wasn't forgiveness. But it wasn't hate either. A few days later, I was watering the plants when I got a call from Ethan's sister, Rachel. We hadn't spoken since the affair. She'd been one of the many who cut me off completely. I heard you moved out, she said bluntly. Yes, I replied, unsure where this was going. You gave him space. That's unexpected. Rachel, I know you probably hate me, but I do, she said flatly. But I also believe in redemption. I saw what you wrote in the letter you gave him. That was raw. Honest. More than I thought you were capable of. I was stunned silent. Just don't waste this chance, she added before hanging up. Later that night, I found myself scrolling through our old family vacation photos again. One in particular made me pause. It was from a trip to Maine. Ethan and I sitting by a campfire, the boys roasting marshmallows behind us. We looked so alive, so in sync. I missed that woman. I missed the way Ethan looked at her. The next morning, I gathered the courage to ask Ethan to meet for coffee. Not as husband and wife, but as co-parents. As two people who had shared over a decade of love, laughter, and yes, now betrayal. He agreed. We sat at a small cafe near the park. It was awkward at first, filled with long silences and stirring coffee that didn't need to be stirred. But slowly, the conversation flowed. We talked about the boys, school plans, the neighbor's dog that kept digging up his yard. Then he asked something that stopped me cold. "Why Steve?" he said quietly, eyes not on me, but fixed on his coffee. "You said I gave you everything. So why him?" I swallowed hard. Because I was stupid. Because I thought I could chase a thrill without it meaning anything. And because deep down, I felt invisible. He looked up then. "Invisible." I nodded, blinking back tears. "You were always so strong, so consistent. I never had to wonder if you'd be there. But somewhere along the line, I think I stopped wondering if I mattered. I needed attention. I needed to feel wanted. And I went looking for it in the worst place imaginable." He didn't respond. Just sat there, staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time in years. "I'm not asking for everything back," I whispered. "I'm just asking for a chance to show you I'm not that woman anymore." After a long pause, he finally said, "I don't know what to do with all this. But I'll think about it." It wasn't a promise, but it was a thread, a fragile one. And for now, that was enough to hold on to. I held on to that fragile thread Ethan gave me like it was a lifeline. A single sentence, "I'll think about it," looped in my head for days. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it meant I hadn't been completely erased from his heart. Over the next few weeks, I tried to stay consistent. No grand gestures, no emotional ambushes. Just stability. I kept our calls short, focused on the boys. I stopped trying to force affection. I let him lead. And slowly, the ice began to thin. One Sunday afternoon, while the boys were outside riding their bikes, Ethan invited me to stay for dinner. That hadn't happened since the affair. I almost dropped the casserole dish I was holding. "Just dinner," he said flatly. "For the kids." Still, I was grateful. I set the table while he grilled in the backyard, the smell of charcoal and marinated meat drifting through the open window like nostalgia. For a moment, it felt like we were a family again, minus the warmth in his eyes. When we sat down, Ethan didn't speak much, but he didn't leave the table either. The boys chatted about school and their latest science project, and I just listened, soaking up the normalcy like a starving woman at a feast. After we finished, I helped clean up while Ethan loaded the dishwasher. As we stood side by side, rinsing plates, he broke the silence. "You've been doing better," he said. I froze for a second. "I'm trying. I can see that." It was the first acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't irredeemable. But with progress came complexity. That week, I ran into Marcia at the grocery store. She looked thinner, paler, a different woman than the one who used to wave at me from her driveway with a coffee in hand. She spotted me before I could turn away. "You've got some nerve," she muttered, voice low but cold. "Shopping like everything's normal." "I'm sorry, Marcia," I whispered, already feeling my face burn with shame. She stepped closer. "I don't care about your apology. I care about what you did to my family." "I know. I think about it every day." She stared at me for a long moment. "Then you're not as empty as I thought." And with that, she walked away. Her words clung to me for days. Not empty, just broken. Later that week, Ethan invited me and the boys on a weekend trip to the lake cabin. My heart raced when I read the message. He added, "Separate rooms." Just like before. Don't read into it. I didn't care. The chance to be together, even just as parents, was more than I could ask for. At the cabin, the boys were thrilled. They skipped rocks, played board games, roasted marshmallows by the fire. I took photos, trying to capture every second. Ethan was more relaxed here, away from the weight of routine, of memories tainted by betrayal. One night, while the boys were asleep, I found him on the porch, sipping a glass of bourbon, the lake shimmering under the moonlight. I stepped outside slowly. "Mind if I sit?" He didn't respond, but didn't stop me either. So I sat beside him, arms wrapped around myself against the chill. "You know," he said after a while, "this place used to feel like an escape." "It still can," I offered. He looked at me. "No, because everywhere I go, you're still there." The words hit harder than I expected. "I wish I could change what happened," I whispered. "But I can't. I can only show you that I'm still here, trying." His expression softened for just a second. Then he looked away. "I'm not sure I can ever see you the same way again." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Then maybe we don't go back. Maybe we build something new." The silence between us wasn't cruel this time. It was contemplative. The next morning, we cooked breakfast together for the boys. It was clumsy, like we were learning a new dance. But they laughed and teased us, and for a moment, Ethan smiled at me. Not politely, not distantly, genuinely. That one smile carried me through the rest of the trip. Still, I knew the path ahead was far from clear. Ethan was haunted. He had walls around his heart built so high, even he couldn't see over them. And maybe I didn't deserve to scale them. But I'd made a vow to myself that if there was even one brick loose, I'd find it and keep pressing forward. Because I loved him. And love, real love, isn't about what you're owed. It's about what you're willing to endure for the chance to heal what was once whole, even if it means living in the cracks. It had been nearly 2 years since my world imploded. I measured time in terms of before the affair and after the betrayal. And in that time, every day felt like a delicate negotiation between hope and despair, regret and resolve. Ethan had slowly, reluctantly allowed me to exist in his orbit again. But love? That never truly returned. He offered civility, routine, even moments of quiet companionship, but never intimacy, never closeness. The night it all changed, I should have seen it coming. We were sitting in the living room, him on the far end of the couch, me on the other. The boys had just gone to bed after one of our rare, peaceful family dinners. I had let myself feel content. That was the mistake. Ethan cleared his throat, and I looked up from the book I was pretending to read. "I've filed the papers," he said. My heart dropped. "Divorce?" He nodded, his face unreadable. "I've been thinking about it for months. This arrangement, it's not a marriage. It's a prison sentence for both of us." I stared at him, trying to find air. "But we've made progress. We've come so far." "You've come far," he said, not unkindly. "I see it. You've changed. You've grown. But I can't move past it. Not while we're still married." The silence was deafening. He continued, "I still love you. But it's like loving a memory that's been stained. I keep trying to wipe it clean, but the mark's too deep. And staying married to you just keeps reopening the wound." I tried to speak, but my throat burned. I nodded slowly, then whispered, "So this is it?" "Not necessarily," he replied. "I'm not saying goodbye forever. Just not like this. Not tied to a contract that binds us in resentment." It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in months. And as much as it shattered me, I knew he was right. A few days later, I moved out again. This time, it wasn't temporary. I found a small apartment near the boys' school. They adjusted surprisingly well. Ethan and I worked out a schedule that allowed them to float between our homes. We never argued. We never raised voices. But the silence was heavier than any scream. On the day the divorce finalized, he asked me to meet him for coffee. I didn't know what to expect. I wore something simple. I kept my makeup light, my hair tied back. I didn't want to look like I was trying too hard. When I arrived, he was already there, hands wrapped around a cup, eyes lost in thought. He stood when he saw me, always the gentleman, even when we were unraveling. We talked about the boys, about school, about the new dog they wanted. Then he reached into his coat pocket and slid a document across the table. "I want you to have this," he said. It was a copy of the post-nup, nullified, void now, but he had added something. A handwritten note at the bottom. "You kept your promise. I just didn't know how to forgive while still holding the weight. Maybe now? I can." Tears stung my eyes. Then he surprised me again. "Let's have dinner tonight. Just us." I agreed, trying not to overthink it. That evening, we sat across from each other in a quiet restaurant. No boys. No distractions. Just two people who had once promised forever and then broken everything. He talked about the first time he saw me at college, how I laughed too loud at a professor's joke. I told him about the first time he made me feel safe, the day my father died. We reminisced. We smiled. We didn't touch, but we were closer than we'd been in months. At the end of the night, he walked me to my car. The air was cold, crisp with the early signs of fall. "Thank you," I said softly. He hesitated, then leaned in, not to kiss me, but to press his forehead against mine, like we used to when words felt too heavy. "I don't know what comes next," he whispered, "but I'm willing to find out." We didn't drive off into a romantic sunset. There was no rekindled passion in the bedroom. But for the first time in a long time, there was something real, something that felt like the fragile beginning of healing. We'd been lovers, enemies, strangers. Now, maybe we could become something else. Something honest. Not a new start, but a new chapter. And I was finally ready to turn the page. Looking back, if there's one truth I've come to accept, it's this: trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to repair. I carried the guilt like a stone in my chest, not just for what I did, but for what I lost. The warmth of a man who once adored me without question. The biggest lesson I've learned is that love cannot survive without respect, and respect dies the moment betrayal enters the room. For those in long marriages, especially in later years, let me say this: never take emotional comfort for granted, and never seek temporary thrills at the expense of something sacred. I thought I was immune to temptation, but all it took was one reckless decision to burn down decades of peace. If you're feeling unseen or unheard in your marriage, talk before you act. And if you've been betrayed, take time, yes, but also know healing doesn't always mean returning to what was. Sometimes, peace comes from walking away. In the end, I may not have regained his heart, but I found a version of myself that's wiser, more grounded, and painfully aware of what matters most: honesty, loyalty, and the quiet strength of forgiveness, whether it's granted or not.